in this video, we're going to take what we started doing last time, specifically the menu that we have, and I'm going to fill it out. I want to work with the data from the Ontario dataset, and I want to use Angular to transform that into something visual that we can represent in the DOM. Okay, so quick review. We're trying to take this data from the Ontario government about all the different bridges. A bridge has an ID, has a name, has a latitude and longitude and a width and a length and so on. And we want to pull it into our project. So what I've done is I've got a comma separated values file, a CSV file that I've downloaded, and I've cleaned it up a little bit because I don't care about all of the data. So for the purposes of this walkthrough, I only care about some of the fields. But essentially we have an ID, we have a name, comma, a latitude, a longitude, and then potentially a width and a length. And not every bridge has a width and a length. I guess I should say the bridges also have a date that when they were created. Okay, so the very first thing that I want to do, because I'm in TypeScript, I need to come up with a way to represent what a bridge is. I have to define my data types. So I've got a file started here that's empty. So inside source app bridge.ts, I have a file where I need to define what a bridge is. So what I'm going to do in TypeScript, we're going to use interfaces to do this. So I'm going to export from my module, my bridge module, I'm going to export an interface for a bridge. So what does a bridge have? I've given some examples here to show you. A bridge has an ID, a name, those are strings. It has latitude and longitude and year, those are numbers. And it has a length and a width. Now the length and the width may or may not exist. They may be null. So we have to be a little bit careful here. So let's go through this. So the first thing we have is an ID. ID is of type string. So that's good, we know that. Name is also of type string. Latitude is a number. Longitude is a number. Year is a number. So far, so good. Now we get into the length of the bridge. This is a number, or it might also be null. So it's one of the two. So we're going to use a union here to say it's one or the other of these two. And the width is the same thing. It's a number or it's null. So I'm going to use this bridge interface throughout my whole program in order to tell TypeScript what a bridge is. Whenever it's trying to figure out, when Angular needs to or TypeScript needs to work with a bridge, I have to define it as a custom data type. And you'll often have to do this with users, products, blog posts, anything that you're trying to build an abstraction around those things, and you're going to have to define interfaces and classes that can do this. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I won't go into the details of it right now, all of the code, but I'll post this code for you. I wrote a script in Node to be able to load and parse the comma-separated values file that I get from the government website and turn it into a TypeScript module. And it uses a couple of modules that I need to install. So I need a CSV parser and I need a stream transformer. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to say that I want to install these. And if you think about what this is a piece of code that I'm writing that is for generating some part of my source code. So where do I want to put it? Dependencies or dev dependencies? In this case, it's a dev dependency. So I'm going to tell it that I want to save this in my dev dependencies when it installs it. And I want to install the CSV parse module and the stream transform module. Those have finished installing, and now I can use this to run my script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my tools directory, and I'm going to use Node to run this CSV to TypeScript.js. And what I'm hoping to do is take this CSV and generate a new file, bridges.ts, which will be a module that I can use that has all of these all of this data transformed into something that I can use in TypeScript. So I'm going to run this. And if that worked, you're going to see that I now have these two files. I have my bridge file, which we just wrote a second ago, and now I have bridges.ts, and this is a file that was generated by my other script. So here's what we're going to be using. First line says we need to import the bridge interface into this file so that we can make use of it. So again, we're in TypeScript, so we have to be really careful about our typing. And then we're going to export bridges, which is a variable essentially. And what is the type of this variable? It's an array of bridges. So you can see that I have all of these object literals that have come from the data in the CSV file, and they're ready to be used in the rest of our program to be able to make this work. Okay, so we have a bridge data type, we have a set of bridges, and what we want to do now is we want to get this put inside Angular. So I'm going to start up my compiler, get this thing going, and I want to work on the menu. So our menu component at the moment looks like this, which is why you're seeing menu works over here. And we need to change this around. So I want to design my menu so that it contains the data that I have for the bridges. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to start out, and whenever possible, when you're building out your UI, you want to try as much as possible to use semantic elements, so HTML elements that make sense in the context where you're working. So we're building a menu of navigation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the whole thing inside of a nav. And if you think about what we have in the nav, we have bridge, 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 bridge. We have a list. We have an unordered list of items. So that's exactly what I'm going to use. I'm going to say we have an unordered list. And inside this, we have a list item, and our list item is the name of the first bridge. So this will be the bridge name, like so. Okay. And let me just save. I have a number of files I need to save here. Okay. Component.ts. Good. So here's what we have. We have this, the beginning of our menu here. Bridge name looks like this. We don't have all the bridges yet. That's what we have to do now. We have to put all of these in place. So we have a number of problems that we have to solve. So if we go into our menu component, the first thing that we need to do is we need to define that this component can make use of the bridge interface and the bridges array module that we just defined, or we just wrote code to generate. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say that I want to import bridge from the bridge TS file. And I want to import bridges from bridges. So I'm not putting .ts, .js, etc. It's a good habit not to put either of those because I want this to work, just whatever the language is. So I'm just going to import the module name and let it figure out what's going on. You can see that right now these are grayed out because I'm not using them. So that's the first thing I need to solve. So inside my menu component, I'm going to add a member, and the member is going to be called bridges. Bridges needs a type. What's the type? The type is it's an array of bridge elements, and I'm going to set it equal to the bridges that I am exporting from this bridges file. So the bridges file exports an array, this big long array of all the different bridges, and I'm pulling that into my menu component, and I'm binding it to this property of my class, the bridges property. Okay? So I'll save that. And at this point, I can start making some changes. So one of the things that I can do here is I can start to make use of some of the really cool built-in features for Angular templating. The first one that I'm going to use is I want to be able to use a directive that's going to allow me to create multiple items as we go on down. So what I want to have is I want to have many of these list items, not just one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify that this list item uses the ng4 directive. So I'm going to say that I want to go, basically what I want to do is I want to write a loop here. I want to say let every bridge in the bridges array. Now when I say bridges here, what's going to happen is it's going to give me access to the member of this class. So it's like I'm saying, you know, this dot bridges. I'm accessing the bridges property of the current component. So Angular is going to take care of running this template in the context. So these expressions are happening in the context of my component. So I don't have to mess around with some of the, in React, you're often dealing with binding this and making sure that this, the keyword this, always points to the right thing. And there's various places where you're going to run into problems doing that, and there's different solutions that people have come up with. Here, that problem kind of disappears because you're always in a class and you're in the context of that class, and so we don't have to do anything more here. So I'm going to say that I want to, let me just try and make this more obvious. My list item, I want to run this for every bridge in bridges. I want to run this. Okay, so if I save and run this code, what it's going to do is it's going to repeat this element right here every time. I've got an error here. What's my error? Since it has no property of li, it's unhappy with me. Let me see what I did wrong. G4. Oh, I'm not using the bridge. I think it's probably unhappy with me. Let's actually use the bridge name. So the second thing I'm going to use from the Angular templating languages is I'm going to use string interpolation. So I'm going to put in double curly braces, and what I have in here is an expression that's going to get evaluated. So in this case, what I'm interested in is I'd like to take the current value of bridge as it loops through all of these bridges. I want to take the current bridge. I want to reach into the bridge and I want to get its name. And let me see. I'm just looking at this. I've got it wrong. What have I done? Oh, sorry. I have a typo here. Of. So my loop was wrong. Let me save that. Bridge of bridges. There we go. So what I have now is I've got all my bridges displayed as list items inside of this UL. And that's pretty good. But some of this I don't love because when I notice as I'm going through this, sometimes they're in uppercase, sometimes they're in title case. It's a mess. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use a third aspect of the Angular templating syntax, and that is I'm going to use a pipe. So I'm going to take the bridge name and I'm going to pipe it through a function that I want to transform it. So this pipe's going to transform it into a string. In this case, I could say I want to do, let's say I want to make all of them uppercase. So now every one of these is uppercase, which I find a bit harsh. So what about title case? I want the first letter of each to be capitalized. So That looks better. It's not 100% maybe because we have some things that like abbreviations that should be all caps, but I think I'm going to go with this. I like the look of this. Now, another thing that I'm going to want to do here, because in a minute, I'm going to want to force these labels to get cut off if they're too wide. Right now they're wrapping and I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I want to make it so if you hover your mouse over this, you get a little pop-up that says this is what the full title is. So inside of my list item element, I'm going to say that I want the title to be equal to, and again, I'm going to use this interpolation, bridge.name, and I'm going to pipe that through title case like so. So now if I hover over one of these things, I'll get a pop-up. You can see that I get a little pop-up that says, this is the full name of the thing that you are working on. Next, I think we should get this so that it looks more like we want. So let's change, instead of working on the template, let's switch over to the CSS. So in the CSS, what do I want to do? I want to change the UL so that it has no margin and no padding. And so that has pushed everything out to the side, which is good. That's what we want. If we take a look at, let's just look at these elements. You can see that my nav, or my UL, for example, something to notice about how Angular does what it does. Here, I'm specifying that I want my selector to be UL. And so UL means the UL that's in the context of this component. So it's scoped automatically to this component. It's not going to leak out into other parts of your CSS in your app. And the way that they do that is interesting. So you can see that Angular has added this underscore ng content dash LFO dash C16. So they've put this extra attribute on the UL element, and then they've written their selector like, they've used the, let me just copy this. So they're actually doing this. And they're saying, I want a UL that has this attribute on it. So it's highly scoped to this particular element. And that's the way that they, like this is generated for us. But when you're trying to understand how they debug this, this is what's going on. And that's how they make it work. Okay, so let's do some more. So I want to do my list item. I have a couple of colors that I've already chosen. So the background color, I want sort of a blue, and I want the text to be a white on top of that. So if I do this, we'll pull up these colors. Let's see, there we go. That looks pretty good. And what else do we need to do? Another thing that I don't like about what's happening here is you'll notice that when I move my mouse over this, I get the I-beam cursor. So because I can select text, but I want these to be clickable. So I want to give some indication to the user that these are clickable. So I'm going to say that I want the cursor to be changed into a pointer. And when I do that, as I move my cursor over this, I should get the hand. You can see that now I get a hand so that this is clickable. In a minute, we want to make this clickable. Okay, we're getting closer. Everything's too jammed together, so let's throw in some padding. I don't know, 0.3 EM. So I'm gonna just stretch everything out a little bit so that there's a little bit more space between. You could play with those numbers if you think that's too much. I don't know. But I'll do it in EMs because then as I scale this UI, there's it's gonna do it relative to the rest of what's going on there. Okay, let's do a few things on this text. You see how this one right here is too wide and it's wrapping down around to the other line. I want to fix that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want the overflow to be hidden. So if I hide the overflow, what it's going to do is it's going to cut it off right here. We won't see any extra space on the right. I'm going to specify that I want the text overflow to use ellipses. I want the ... So instead of wrapping In a minute, I want to turn off the word wrap and I want it to say ... And finally, I want the white space. Basically, I don't want it to wrap. Normally it's going to wrap, but I don't want it to wrap when it goes around the edge. So now you can see what we have is, if anything's too long, we just get the ... And if I were to hover my mouse over it, I could see the full text of whatever it is. I think these are too tight. Okay. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to put in a hover effect. So when you go over this, I want to change the font color, and I also want to put a border on the left-hand side. So I'm going to say that when you hover over top of this, I want to change the color. I'm just going to copy and I have this in another window. So let's do this. I want to, like so, yeah. I want to change the color, and I want to put a border, sort of a pink salmon colored border on the left. So as I hover over it, it's going to go like this. So this is almost what I want, but not quite. There's one problem that I have with it. You can see how everything jumps. As I'm scrolling down, it's constantly jumping. And the reason it's jumping is because I'm essentially putting a 4-pixel extra border on the left-hand side of this thing. So what I need to compensate for that up here. So if I'm not hovering over this, I need to also add a left-hand border that's 4 pixels solid. But what color do I put? Because I could say use the same color as this. But another thing you can do, a trick you can do, is you can say I want to use a transparent color. And so now what's going to happen is everything's going to get bumped out just a little bit. And when I hover over these things, you'll see that nothing's moving. There's sort of a little region that has been left where that can live. So you don't have any issue with it jumping as you're moving around. This looks good, and what I want to do now is I want to make it so that when you click on this, something happens. Eventually, I want clicking on this to alter what happens on the right. So I need to wire in code to make that happen. So in the React situation, what you would do is you would pass a function down on props from the parent component into the child, and you would say, here's the function I want you to call when a click happens or something like that. So we have to do it slightly differently here in Angular. So in my HTML template, what I need to do is I need to use yet another piece of the templating syntax for Angular, and that is I need to specify an event handler on a DOM node, which is going to then get connected into some code that I want to run inside of my component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the round bracket syntax, and I'm going to say that when the user clicks on this, what I want to do is I want to call a function. So let's say that when the user clicks on this, I want to call a function on bridge selected. And yeah, so similar to what we did up here where we said bridges, down here what I'm saying is it's kind of like saying this dot on bridge selected. I'm saying I want to call this function on bridge selected. And furthermore, I want to tell this function which bridge was selected. So we actually know which bridge was selected. We have essentially a closure here where we have access to bridge. As we're going through this loop and we're generating each one of these elements, we can capture that bridge and we can say when the user clicks on this list item, capture the bridge reference that we have here. I want to pass that bridge reference into this function so that I have access to it when I'm trying to work with this. Okay, so let's try that. So if I go back to my component on bridge selected bridge. That means that in my component, I need to have a function on a member function on bridge selected. It's going to take an argument bridge. The type of bridge is bridge, which we imported up here. So we're going to say this, it takes a bridge and it returns nothing, it returns void. So we have a function. For now, let's just console.log on bridge selected, and I'll just print out the bridge. Save this and recompile. And now I have my console here. If I click on a bridge, I get nothing. So what have I missed? Oh, I haven't saved. Let me save this file, but also my menu component. I need this click handler to be registered. Let's try this again. So I go here, I click on a bridge, that worked. So every time I click on one of these things, it's going from the click handler on the DOM node, so on click, and it's calling into the components on bridge selected function. It's passing the bridge object. So each time I do it, I get a different bridge, whichever one I do, I have access to all of the properties for the data that's in here. So this is great. So now I have locally within the component, I have all these bridges. The bridges all live inside of this menu component, and I'm printing them all out in the DOM. I display them as list items. The user clicks on one of them, and I need to send that back up to the parent. So that's the next piece that I have to build here. In order to send this up to the parent, I need the parent to be able to listen for an event that comes out of the child component. So what we have to do is, on the other side of that, we have to have something that can emit an event up to the parent. Okay, so in Angular, the way we do this is we use an event emitter. So an event emitter allows us to literally emit or send back some piece of data to anyone who has registered to listen for it. An event emitter is kind of like calling a function, but it's detached from the two pieces of code having to know about each other so much. So you have this ability for an event to take place. I mean, we've been doing this a lot when you're just in regular HTML and you say add event listener, and you say I want to listen for the click event, and when the click event happens, I want to run this function, right? So really that's what an event emitter is. Something is emitting a click event, and you are binding a function to that, or registering a listening function to that, which can subscribe for and listen to those events. So we're going to create an event emitter, and we need to basically define something that we can emit to. So we're going to say bridge selected is a member of this component, and it's of type event emitter, and this event emitter returns or emits a reference to a bridge, and we're going to create a new event emitter like so. Now at this stage we have a property on the component, but we have to make this property available to the parent. So we have to pull in another piece of Angular here. We need the output decorator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the output decorator, and I'm going to specify that I want this bridge selected event emitter, I want it to be available to my parent component. Whoops, it's a decorator, so I have to use @. So this bridge selected lives on this component. It is an event emitter that is going to emit bridge instances, and it's available to the parent, whoever wants to get access to it. So how do I use this thing in my code? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want to reach into the component, I want to get bridge selected, and I want to emit the bridge that was just chosen. So we're essentially building this chain where we start at the DOM. In the DOM, we have an HTML element, we have a list item element. And when the click event happens, we have a listener that's attached to that. Angular has done this for us. It is going to pass that such that it calls this function on bridge selected, and it's going to allow us to call this function, pass the bridge into our component. And what our component is going to do is it's going to then send it further on. It's going to emit it to any registered components. In this case, it's going to be the parent component who's going to have access to this thing. And we're going to pass back and say, this is the bridge that was just chosen when this happened. Okay. So right now this will work, but it won't do anything because we don't have anything listening on the other side of this. So what we have to do is we have to make use of the event that's coming out of our app menu. Okay, so if we go back to our app component, remember that our app component currently looks like this. We have an app menu that has an ID, and that's it. Well, what we need to do is we need to register a handler on this in the same way. So remember what we did a minute ago. We would say click equals some function that needs to be called, right? Well, we're not interested in a click event because there is no click event. We're interested in the bridge selected event, or this emitter that's gonna, this is how we're gonna bind this output that's coming out of our component. And when this happens, we want to handle the bridge change. Let me type this and then I'll explain it. So our app menu here has an output event emitter called bridge selected. When the user clicks on a DOM node, it's going to trigger the bridge selected event emitter to emit the bridge that was just chosen. Inside of our app component here, we are going to connect the output event emitter bridge selected, and we're gonna send that data into a new function called handle bridge change. Handle bridge change. So we have to write that. Now notice this here, event. This says the data that is coming back from this event emitter, I want to pass it in as the argument to this function. So I want to receive this event, and the event that we're passing is the bridge, and the type of it is a bridge. So we are emitting a bridge, that's the event. And here in our app component, we need to make use of that. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm gonna say handle bridge change, and the type of this, I'm gonna receive a bridge, and the type is a bridge. Well, this component doesn't know about bridge because I haven't imported it. So we have to say import bridge from the bridge file, bridge.ts. So handle bridge change takes a bridge, returns nothing, and it's going to go here. So to begin with, what I'm going to do, console.log, handle bridge change, and I'm going to just log this bridge. Okay, so if we click on this, we should see two things. The first thing that happens is the onBridge selected function fires inside of our menu component, and you can see the bridge gets printed out. That is going to cause it's going to trigger it to go up. Let me show this to you. We were talking about debugging in an earlier. Let me try and debug this for you. So if I were to go into my menu component, let's go here. So I'm gonna click on a bridge, and as soon as I click on a bridge, you can see that it stopped here. So I'm gonna step over this. So it's gonna call this .bridgeSelected.emit. right? So that's how this works. If I were to set another breakpoint inside my app component, in my app component, handle bridge change, if I hit play right now, what's going to happen is it's going to emit it, and it's going to then, because that has been registered, it's going to get sent up here. So I hit play and it drops down into that function. Okay, let me get rid of this. Play. So this looks good. So we now have a pipeline that goes from a list item to our menu component to our app component all the way up. And what are we going to do with this information? Well, I'd like to keep track of, I'd like to define the current bridge, the bridge that's chosen. So I want to have some state in the app, and I want to keep track of which bridge is currently chosen. So by default, when the app begins, there's no bridge chosen. But as soon as the user clicks on one, I want to handle that case. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say this dot current bridge is equal to the bridge that was just passed to me from the menu component. This is going to allow us in the next videos to be able to take a bridge that when it gets chosen in the menu and then pass that data up and around into the bridge info component on the right so that it can make use of this.